Let me start with something uncomfortable. The life you want is not being blocked by bad luck, the system, or other people. It's being blocked by a version of you that refuses to die, the version that hesitates, the version that wants results without pressure, the version that keeps choosing comfort over growth and then wonders why nothing changes. That version is expensive. It costs you time. It costs you respect, especially self-respect. And if you don't deal with it early, it will quietly steal decades from your life. Today isn't about hype. It's about clarity. This is a hard, grounded conversation about discipline, long-term vision, and personal responsibility. No shortcuts, no fantasies, just truth you can build a future on. If you're serious about becoming dangerous in skill, in focus, in execution, then you have to kill the weak version of yourself first. The weak version of you is not loud or obvious. It doesn't announce itself as failure. It feels reasonable. It sounds like self-care. It disguises itself as patience, balance, and timing. It tells you there's no rush, that you deserve ease before effort, that pressure can wait. And that's why it's dangerous, because it doesn't attack your life directly. It slowly negotiates it downward. Comfort is not evil. It's useful in recovery, in reflection, in rest that is earned. But when comfort becomes the default state rather than a tool, it quietly erodes ambition. The human brain is wired to conserve energy. Left unchecked, it will always choose the path that feels safest in the moment, even if that path leads nowhere over time. This isn't a character flaw. It's biology. And if you don't override it with structure and intentional pressure, biology will make decisions for you. Pressure is not stress for the sake of suffering. Pressure is constraint. It's the presence of stakes. It's knowing that if you don't act, there will be consequences you can't ignore. Deadlines, responsibilities, standards, and expectations force clarity. Under pressure, distractions lose their appeal. Priorities sharpen. You stop pretending that everything matters equally. The weak version of you resists this because pressure removes escape routes. It exposes what you've been avoiding. Look at how people behave when there are no consequences. Meetings drift. Plans stay vague. Fitness goals become ideas instead of actions. Savings get postponed. When nothing is on the line, effort becomes optional. And optional effort is rarely consistent. Now compare that to moments when something truly mattered. When a job was on the line. When a family depended on you. When time ran out. Suddenly energy appeared. Focus locked in. The same person, different conditions. The difference wasn't talent or intelligence. It was pressure. The mistake many people make is waiting to feel ready before they introduce pressure. They think pressure should come after confidence, after clarity, after motivation. In reality, pressure is what creates those things. Confidence is built by surviving difficulty. Clarity comes from making decisions under constraint. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. When you wait for comfort to disappear on its own, you're waiting for a system that doesn't exist. Every meaningful improvement in life has an opportunity cost. Choosing pressure means giving up certain comforts. Sleep gets shorter before it gets better. Social time becomes selective. Entertainment loses priority. These are not sacrifices forever, but they are sacrifices now. The weak version of you fixates on what it's losing in the short term, not what it's buying in the long term. They sees the pain clearly, but discounts the future reward as uncertain. That's a cognitive bias, not wisdom. You see this in everyday life. Someone wants financial stability but avoids learning difficult skills because it feels overwhelming after work. Someone wants physical strength but avoids the discomfort of consistent training because it disrupts routine. Someone wants respect but avoids hard conversations because they're uncomfortable. In each case, comfort is chosen over pressure, and the outcome is predictable. Months pass. Nothing changes. Frustration grows, not because effort was impossible, but because discomfort was avoided. Pressure forces honesty. When time is limited, you stop lying to yourself about what matters. When energy is constrained, you learn where it actually goes. When expectations are clear, excuses lose credibility. This honesty is uncomfortable, but is productive. It reveals inefficiencies in how you think and act. It shows you where your habits don't match your goals. Without pressure, these mismatches can exist for years without being confronted. There's also a quiet confidence that comes from choosing pressure voluntarily. When you impose standards on yourself before the world does, you gain leverage. You are no longer reacting to emergencies. You are shaping outcomes. Voluntary pressure is different from chaos. It's intentional. It's structured. It's choosing to wake up earlier, not because life is forcing you to, but because you decided your future deserves undistracted time. It's choosing to train consistently, not because you're ashamed, but because you respect what your body is capable of becoming. The weak version of you often confuses pressure with burnout. They are not the same. Burnout comes from effort without meaning, from pressure without purpose. Productive pressure is aligned with a clear direction. It is finite. It has recovery built into it, but it does not negotiate with laziness. It does not wait for moods. It operates on commitments, not feelings. Another uncomfortable truth is that pressure reveals character more than comfort ever will. When things are easy, almost everyone looks disciplined. When pressure arrives, patterns emerge. Some people rise because they've practiced operating under constraint. Others collapse because they've been protected by comfort for too long. The goal is not to seek crisis, but to train under controlled difficulty so that real pressure doesn't break you when it inevitably shows up. Long-term thinkers understand that a comfortable life is often the result of years of discomfort handled well. They front-load the pain. They accept that the early stages of building anything worthwhile feel inefficient, lonely, and slow. The weak version of you interprets that feeling as a signal to stop. The stronger version recognizes it as a signal that the process is working. Pressure simplifies life. It strips away excess. It teaches you to value time, attention, and energy as limited resources. When you live without pressure, these resources leak. When you live with it, they get allocated deliberately. That allocation is what builds momentum. Momentum is not excitement. It's the quiet accumulation of correct actions repeated under constraint. The truth most people avoid is that their lives are not too hard. They are too unstructured. Without pressure, days blur together. Intentions stay abstract. Potential remains theoretical. Pressure turns theory into practice. It forces decisions, and decisions create direction. Killing the weak version of yourself does not require aggression or self-hatred. It requires honesty and standards. It requires accepting that growth feels heavy before it feels rewarding. It requires choosing pressure not because you enjoy suffering, but because you understand trade-offs. Comfort gives you ease now and cost later. Pressure costs you now and pays you back with options, strength, and freedom over time. If your life feels stagnant, look closely at where you've removed pressure to stay comfortable. That is usually where growth is stalled. The weak version of you wants to be recognized before it has earned anything solid. It feels a constant urge to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and affirmed. This urge doesn't come from confidence. It comes from uncertainty. When progress is fragile or incomplete, the mind looks outward for reassurance. Approval becomes a substitute for evidence. Instead of letting results speak, the weak version starts explaining plans, posting intentions, and collecting reactions as if they were achievements. This feels productive, but it isn't. It's a form of emotional consumption that delays real work. Human beings are social by nature, so the desire for approval is not a flaw. It becomes a problem when it interferes with execution. Every time you seek validation, you introduce noise into a process that requires clarity. Opinions multiply. Doubt sneaks in, focus gets divided. The more people you involve prematurely, the more your direction starts bending toward what sounds good rather than what actually works. This is not because others want to sabotage you, but because most people evaluate ideas based on comfort and familiarity, not long-term potential. When you share unfinished goals, you also distort your internal reward system. The brain releases a small sense of satisfaction when it receives approval, even if nothing tangible has been produced. That satisfaction can reduce the urgency to follow through. You feel like you move forward when, in reality, you've only talked. Over time, this creates a habit of substituting communication for creation. The outcome is predictable. A lot of activity, very little progress. Quiet building is uncomfortable because it offers no immediate feedback. No one claps for discipline. No one praises consistency behind closed doors. When effort becomes repetitive and invisible, the weak version of you starts questioning whether it matters at all. That's when approval becomes tempting. A compliment, a like, a nod of agreement feels like proof that you're on the right path. But proof is not emotional. Proof is measurable. It shows up as improved skill, stronger systems, or tangible results. Approval does not guarantee any of that. There is also an opportunity cost to be invisible too early. Time spent explaining is time not spent refining. Energy spent managing opinions is energy not spent solving problems. Attention is a finite resource, and every external validation you chase pulls that resource away from deep work. The strongest outcomes in life are rarely built in public at the early stages because early stages are inefficient. They involve mistakes, revisions, and learning curves. Visibility at that stage creates pressure to perform instead of pressure to improve. Look at everyday behavior. People announce fitness goals before they built the habit, then disappear when consistency becomes difficult. Others talk about starting businesses long before they understand the basics, then abandon the idea after the first obstacle. In both cases, approval was front-loaded and effort was back-loaded. When effort finally demanded isolation and discipline, the emotional fuel ran out. Quiet builders avoid this trap by delaying visibility until the foundation can support it. Seeking approval also subtly shifts your standards. When you rely on external feedback, your sense of what is good enough becomes dependent on reactions. If praise comes easily, you may stop pushing. If criticism appears, you may abandon something that only needed time. Long-term thinkers don't outsource judgment during the building phase. They define internal metrics: hours invested, skills improved, systems completed, and they measure progress against those standards, not against applause. There's a psychological safety in building quietly. When no one is watching, you are free to experiment. You can fail without embarrassment. You can change direction without explaining yourself. This freedom is essential for growth because learning is rarely linear. The weak version of you fears this invisibility because it feels like irrelevance. In reality, invisibility during preparation is what allows relevance later. Another uncomfortable truth is that most people are not thinking about your goals as much as you think they are. Their approval is temporary, shallow, and easily distracted. Basing your motivation on something so unstable is risky. When their attention moves on, your drive collapses. Strong builders understand this and anchor motivation internally. They don't need to be seen to stay consistent because their commitment is to the outcome, not the image. Quiet work also sharpens focus. When you remove the urge to update others, you reduce mental clutter. Decisions become simpler. You stop asking, "How will this look?" and start asking, "Does this work?" That shift changes everything. It moves you from performance to progress. Over time, this creates a depth of competence that cannot be faked. When results finally become visible, they speak with authority precisely because they were not rushed. Approval seeking often comes from a fear of being misunderstood. The weak version of you wants reassurance that the effort will be worth it. But reassurance cannot replace patience. Long-term outcomes require periods where the only proof is your own discipline. This is where many people quit. Not because the path is wrong, but because it is quiet. Divided focus is another hidden cost. When you are building for approval, you start tailoring your actions to what might impress others rather than what compounds over time. You choose visible wins over foundational ones. You optimize for short-term reactions instead of long-term leverage. This is how promising paths slowly degrade into shallow ones. The strongest individuals delay the conversation. They let time do the talking. They understand that credibility earned slowly is more durable than attention gained quickly. When they finally share what they built, it requires no explanation. The structure stands on its own. Killing the weak version of yourself here means accepting invisibility as part of the process. It means choosing solitude over applause and clarity over commentary. It means trusting that disciplined action repeated quietly will eventually produce something real. Not something that needs defending or explaining, but something that works. The weak version of you is impatient in ways it doesn't fully understand. It is not always reckless or impulsive on the surface. Often it looks practical, realistic, even cautious. But underneath, it is obsessed with immediacy. It wants relief now, pleasure now, certainty now. It evaluates decisions based on how they feel today, not on what they build over time. This is how short-term thinking quietly shapes the life without ever announcing itself as a problem. Short-term thinking doesn't usually destroy things all at once. It erodes them slowly through small, reasonable choices. One skipped workout because today was stressful. One unnecessary purchase because you deserved it. One more late night even though tomorrow matters. None of these decisions feel fatal. In isolation, they aren't. The damage happens through repetition. Choices compound, whether you pay attention or not. Time doesn't reward intention, it rewards behavior. The human mind is naturally biased toward the present. Immediate rewards feel more real than future ones. A comfort now feels certain, a benefit later feels abstract. This bias made sense when survival depended on short-term decisions, but in modern life it becomes a liability. Long-term outcomes like financial independence, mastery, health, or trust are built through actions whose rewards are delayed. The weak version of you understands this conceptually but not emotionally. It knows the theory, yet still chooses the shortcut when the moment arrives. For every decision carries a trade-off, even when it doesn't look like one. Choosing entertainment over skill-building trades, future leverage for present ease. Choosing convenience over preparation trades tomorrow's stress for today's comfort. Choosing shallow relationships over disciplined solitude trades growth for distraction. These trades are rarely labeled as such in the mind. They are framed as harmless, temporary, deserved. Over time, the bill arrives anyway. Long-term thinking requires the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately resolving it. That discomfort might be boredom, uncertainty, loneliness, or delayed gratification. The weak version of you treats discomfort as a signal that something is wrong. The stronger version recognizes it as a signal that something meaningful is happening. This distinction changes how choices are made under pressure. Look at how people approach money. Many earn enough to improve their situation, yet remain trapped because they prioritize short-term consumption over long-term stability. The purchases feel small. The reasoning feels sound. The outcome years later feels unfair. The same pattern shows up in health, where neglecting small disciplines creates large consequences that feel sudden, but were actually built slowly. The problem was never a lack of knowledge. It was a preference for now over later. Short-term thinking also distorts how people measure progress. When results don't show up quickly, doubt replaces patience. Efforts get abandoned prematurely, not because they were wrong, but because they hadn't matured yet. Growth often feels inefficient before it feels effective. The weak version of you interprets that inefficiency as failure. The long-term thinker understands that early effort is an investment phase, not a performance phase. There's a quiet loneliness in long-term thinking that most people underestimate. When you choose future outcomes over immediate rewards, your priorities diverge from the crowd. Your schedule looks different. Your conversations change. Your choices don't always make sense to others. The weak version of you seeks belonging and interprets this divergence as a threat. It pulls you back toward the familiar, even when the familiar is limiting. Opportunity cost is the invisible force here. Every hour spent on something trivial is an hour not spent on something compounding. Because the loss is invisible, it's easy to ignore. But over years, opportunity cost becomes more significant than effort itself. Two people can work equally hard but get vastly different results based on where their time is allocated. Long-term thinkers are ruthless with allocation, not because they are rigid, but because they respect time. Divided priorities are another symptom of short-term thinking. Wanting many outcomes at once often leads to none of them. Focus requires sacrifice. You cannot optimize for comfort, speed, popularity, and depth at the same time. The weak version of you keeps all options open to avoid missing out. In doing so, it misses progress. Long-term thinkers close doors deliberately so energy can concentrate. This feels restrictive in the moment and freeing later. There's also a misunderstanding about patience. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active endurance. It is continuing to do the right thing without immediate feedback. The weak version of you waits for motivation to return. The disciplined version continues regardless, trusting the process because it has been chosen carefully. That trust is built through clarity, not blind optimism. Short-term pleasure often masquerades as stress relief. After a difficult day, distraction feels justified. Sometimes it is, but when relief becomes habitual rather than intentional, it turns into avoidance. Avoidance delays progress and amplifies stress over time. What feels like relief today often becomes pressure tomorrow. Long-term thinkers reverse this relationship. They accept controlled discomfort now to reduce chaos later. You can observe this dynamic in people who prepare versus those who react. Preparation is boring. It rarely feels urgent. Reaction feels alive and important. The weak version of you gravitates toward urgency because it feels meaningful. Long-term thinking values preparation because it reduces dependence on luck. Over time, prepared individuals appear calm not because life is easier, but because fewer decisions are being made under pressure. Another cost of short-term thinking is identity confusion. When actions are driven by immediate feelings, identity becomes unstable. Goals change frequently. Commitments feel heavy. The long-term thinker anchors identity to direction, not mood. This creates consistency. Consistency, not intensity, is what produces exceptional outcomes. Delayed gratification is often misunderstood as denial. In reality, it is selection. You are not rejecting pleasure, you are choosing a higher quality version of it later. Financial freedom, physical capability, and internal confidence are all forms of delayed pleasure. They require saying no repeatedly before they say yes back to you. The weak version of you struggles with this because it underestimates the cumulative effect of small disciplined decisions. Short-term thinking feels harmless because its consequences are quiet at first. Long-term thinking feels heavy because its rewards are quiet at first. Most people choose based on what they can feel immediately. A few choose based on what they understand deeply. That difference over time becomes the gap between potential and reality. The weak version of you believes, often without realizing it, that responsibility is a burden imposed from the outside. It treats circumstances as something that happens to and not something it has to respond to with intention. When outcomes are disappointing, it looks outward first. The economy, the timing, other people's decisions, the lack of support, the unfairness of it all. These explanations can be accurate, but they are rarely useful. Accuracy without ownership does not produce movement. It produces stagnation that feels justified. Blame is comforting because it protects the ego. If something failed because of external factors, then the self remains intact. There is no need to examine habits, decisions, or patterns. The cost of discomfort is control. The moment responsibility is assigned elsewhere, so is power. You cannot change what you do not own. This is the quiet trade-off most people make without noticing. They gain emotional relief in the short term and lose agency in the long term. Taking full ownership does not mean denying reality. It means starting from the only place where action is possible. You cannot choose your starting conditions, but you can choose how you adapt to them. The weak version of you confuses ownership with self-blame and rejects it to avoid guilt. The stronger version understands that ownership is not about judgment. It is about leverage. When you claim responsibility, you gain the right to adjust strategy. Consider how people respond to failure at work. One person explains why the system was flawed, why communication was unclear, why the outcome was predictable. Another asks what could have been done differently within the same constraints. Both might be correct, but only one improves. The difference is not intelligence. It is the willingness to look inward without flinching. Over time, this willingness compounds into competence. Ownership forces clarity. When you stop blaming, patterns become visible. You start noticing where you consistently overcommit, underprepare, procrastinate, or avoid discomfort. These observations are uncomfortable because they remove the illusion that progress is being blocked by rare circumstances. Instead, they reveal that the same choices are being made repeatedly. This realization can sting, but it is also liberating. If patterns created the problem, patterns can be changed. There's also a discipline component to ownership that is often ignored. Blame is mentally lazy. It requires no planning, no adjustment, no sustained effort. Ownership demands structure. It requires you to define standards, track behavior, and accept delayed results. The weak version of you prefers explanations to systems. The stronger version builds systems because systems reduce reliance on mood and willpower. Opportunity cost appears again here. Time spent rehearsing grievances is time not spent refining skills. Energy spent resenting circumstances is energy not spent improving position. These costs are invisible because venting feels productive. It creates the illusion of processing, but processing without action becomes a loop. The mind stays busy while life stays the same. Full ownership also changes how you interpret feedback. When you blame, feedback feels like an attack. When you own, feedback becomes information. The same words land differently depending on who you believe is responsible for the outcome. This shift is subtle but powerful. It determines whether you defend your past or invest in your future. People often avoid ownership because they fear it will expose inadequacy. In reality, it exposes reality. Pretending you had no influence over an outcome does not make you stronger. It makes you fragile. Strength comes from knowing where you are weak and choosing to work there anyway. Long-term thinkers understand that competence is built through repeated correction, not through preserving an image. Ownership also clarifies priorities. When you stop blaming external chaos, you become more selective about what you commit to. You stop saying yes casually because you understand that every yes creates responsibility. This selectivity improves focus. Focus improves execution. Execution produces results. The chain is simple, but it requires honesty at the start. There is a social cost to ownership that many people avoid. When you take responsibility, you lose the comfort of shared excuses. You may no longer fit into conversations centered on complaint and comparison. This can feel isolating. The weak version of you clings to these spaces for validation. The stronger version accepts solitude as the price of progress. Another difficult aspect of ownership is patience. Once you accept responsibility, you cannot demand immediate results. Change takes time. Habits need repetition. Systems need refinement. The weak version of you wants ownership to pay off quickly as proof that the discomfort was worth it. Long-term thinkers commit without demanding instant evidence. They understand that responsibility is not a transaction, it is a position. Ownership also reshapes how you view obstacles. Instead of asking why something happened, you ask what it requires. This shifts the mind from narrative to strategy. Problems become tasks. Tasks become manageable. This does not remove difficulty, but it makes difficulty workable. Over time, this mindset reduces anxiety because fewer situations feel overwhelming. There is a quiet confidence that grows from full ownership. It is not loud or performative. It comes from knowing that regardless of conditions, you will respond with intention. This confidence does not depend on outcomes always going well. It depends on your ability to adjust when they don't. That ability is built through repeated acts of responsibility, especially when it would be easier to blame. Misplaced focus is a common casualty of blame. When attention is directed outward, internal improvement stalls. Skills remain underdeveloped. Habits remain inconsistent. Goals remain vague. Ownership pulls focus back to what is within reach. That focus, sustained over time, is what turns effort into progress. Taking full responsibility does not mean carrying everything alone. It means being honest about your role before seeking help. Help that complements ownership strengthens outcomes. Help that replaces ownership weakens them. The weak version of you wants rescue. The stronger version wants tools. Over time, ownership becomes an identity. You stop asking who is at fault and start asking what is next. This question is not emotional. It is practical. It moves you forward even when circumstances are unfair, especially when they are unfair. The weak version of you treats discipline as something external, like a tool you pick up only when circumstances demand it. It waits for motivation, energy, or the right mood before acting. On good days, it performs. On difficult days, it negotiates. This version believes discipline is about forcing yourself to do unpleasant things, and because of that belief, it resists it. What it fails to see is that discipline is not about force at all. It is about identity. It is about deciding ahead of time who you are and then behaving in alignment with that decision regardless of how you feel in the moment. Human behavior follows identity more reliably than intention. People do not rise to the level of their goals. They fall to the level of their systems. When discipline is treated as an occasional act of willpower, it becomes fragile. Willpower is inconsistent by nature. It fluctuates with sleep, stress, emotion, and environment. The weak version of you builds his life on this unstable foundation and then feels confused when consistency collapses. The stronger version removes negotiation entirely by embedding discipline into identity. It no longer asks, "Do I feel like doing this?" It asks, "Is this what someone like me does?" This shift changes cause and effect in subtle but powerful ways. When discipline is identity-based, actions become predictable. Predictable actions create momentum. Momentum reduces friction. Reduced friction makes long-term effort sustainable. The weak version of you experiences discipline as exhausting because every action requires a decision. Decision fatigue sets in and shortcuts appear reasonable. The disciplined identity experiences discipline as grounding because decisions were already made in advance. You can see this in everyday routines. Someone who identifies as a person who trains does not debate whether to exercise. They simply adjust the intensity if needed. Someone who identifies as a person who manages money does not argue internally about saving. They structure their finances so saving happens automatically. The difference is not motivation. It is self-concept. One version waits to be convinced each day. The other acts from alignment. Discipline also clarifies focus. When identity is unclear, priorities compete. You try to be everything at once, productive and relaxed, ambitious and comfortable, disciplined and spontaneous. These identities conflict. The result is scattered effort. Progress stalls not because you lack ability, but because your energy is divided. Discipline as identity forces selection. You accept that some things must be deprioritized. This acceptance feels restrictive at first, but it is what allows depth to develop. Opportunity cost is unavoidable here. Every discipline habit excludes something else. Early mornings exclude late nights. Focused work excludes constant availability. Training excludes prolonged comfort. The weak version of you resents these exclusions because it frames them as loss. The stronger version reframes them as investment. You are not giving something up. You are reallocating limited resources toward outcomes that compound. There is an emotional maturity required to sustain discipline long term. Discipline does not always feel rewarding in the short run. Often it feels neutral. Sometimes it feels inconvenient. The weak version of you expects discipline to feel inspiring and quits when it doesn't. The disciplined identity understands that feelings are not reliable indicators of value. Many high-value actions feel ordinary while they are being done. Their importance is revealed later through accumulated results. Misplaced focus often shows up when discipline is missing. You start optimizing for stimulation instead of progress. Tasks are chosen based on how engaging they feel rather than how impactful they are. This creates busy days and empty weeks. The weak version of you mistakes activity for advancement. Discipline corrects this by anchoring focus to outcomes rather than sensations. You do what matters, not what entertains. Another uncomfortable truth is that discipline exposes self-deception. When you commit to disciplined behavior, excuses lose their power. You can no longer claim you want something while consistently avoiding the behaviors required to earn it. This confrontation can be unsettling. It forces alignment between words and actions. The weak version of you avoids discipline because it prefers the comfort of potential over the accountability of execution. Discipline also stabilizes emotion. When your actions are guided by identity rather than impulse, mood swings have less influence over your direction. Bad days no longer derail progress. They simply become lower intensity versions of good days. This stability compounds. Over time, life feels less chaotic, not because challenges disappear, but because your response to them is consistent. There is a long-term vision embedded in disciplined identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who honors commitments, even when no one is watching. This internal trust is powerful. It reduces internal conflict. You stop bargaining with yourself. That saved mental energy gets redirected into creativity, problem solving, and refinement. The weak version of you spends enormous energy arguing internally. The disciplined version uses that energy to build. Discipline is often misunderstood as rigidity. In reality, it creates freedom. When core behaviors are non-negotiable, everything else becomes flexible. You can adapt strategies without abandoning standards. You can change goals without losing momentum. The weak version of you confuses flexibility with inconsistency and pays for it with instability. The disciplined identity maintains a stable core while allowing surface-level adjustments. Sacrifice is unavoidable, but it becomes lighter when it is chosen deliberately. When you know why you are disciplined, the sacrifices make sense. They are no longer framed as deprivation, but as alignment. You are not missing out. You are opting into a different future. The weak version of you feels deprived because it wants incompatible outcomes simultaneously. The disciplined identity accepts trade-offs and moves forward without resentment. Over time, discipline reshapes self-respect. You begin to trust yourself because your actions match your standards. This trust is quiet but deep. It does not depend on praise or recognition. It is built through thousands of small promises kept. The weak version of you looks outward for confidence. The disciplined identity builds it internally. Divided priorities quietly destroy outcomes because they prevent momentum from forming. Discipline consolidates effort. It narrows the field. It demands repetition. Repetition builds mastery. Mastery creates leverage. Leverage is what turns effort into disproportionate results over time. When discipline becomes identity, you stop seeing it as something you have to do and start seeing it as something you are. At that point, consistency is no longer heroic. It is simply normal. And what once felt difficult becomes the foundation you stand on without thinking. Let this land clearly. You don't need a new personality. You need to remove the weak behaviors you keep protecting. The weak version of you isn't evil. It's just outdated. And if you don't intentionally kill it, it will quietly decide your future for you. Choose discipline over distraction, vision over validation, pressure over comfort, long-term over instant. because the strongest version of you is already possible, but only if the weaker one steps aside. And that decision, that's yours every single day.